Thank you for the floor, Madam Chair. Like Koskinen said, the choice really boils down to values. What kind of values do we cherish in our society? I think that we need to talk about those values, and I will talk about them in the concept of more corporate power and how EU and democracies, both sides of the Atlantic, lose out through this agreement. And I'm also going to talk about how the EU gets the shorthand of these agreements. I'll try to bring my rebuttal in my speech, but I first want to talk about a few points that I didn't manage to fit into my speech. So Oscar started out with talking about how it's good to remove economic barriers, like small companies would benefit by having reduced regulations. I think that there's a reason why we regulate markets. We think that a free market is a good thing, but it does need a state to regulate the free market. The functioning free market requires state intervention. Otherwise, the free market becomes unfunctional. We think that it's a good thing to have states that are able to regulate when necessary. And we think that that the TTIP agreement would undermine states' ability to have that regulation and to introduce new regulations when it is necessary. So firstly, let me talk about corporate power and how we think that TTIP will undermine states' ability to introduce new regulations. I'll take you in a minute. So, as Koskinen already said, like the ISDS system would strengthen the most powerful corporations in the field. Okay, we think that the investor-state dispute settlement system it necessarily is misplaced in a system where you have functioning courts on either side of the Atlantic, and we could trust those courts to settle disputes instead of a tribunal that is not tied to those jurisdictions. Before I go on, Anna, yeah?
Tom, don't you think that when two states try to regulate on the same thing twice, it stops being regulation and it starts being red tape and waste of time?
Yeah, we think that there's a lot of duplication, sure, but the fundamental values that we think that we should not remove are the values that we have, like the ability of states to introduce new regulations in the field. So, as was already mentioned, the ISDS introduces a sort of threat effect on the states. So corporations, if they feel that their investments, that their assets would be threatened by new regulation, they could threaten the government and take them to court, say that that this introduction of these new rules would harm our investments. Okay, we think that that threat power is misplaced. We think that the cost of threatening states with the cost of lawsuits, like for example Philip Morris did to Togo, threatening them when they wanted to introduce plain packaging on cigarettes, we think that that's the kind of threat effect that makes governments then water down their new regulations or reduce the room for maneuver of the governments to introduce future regulations in the fields. We think that corporations would necessarily scrutinize every new rule that governments would introduce, be it for food safety or whatever, and find ways to threaten the governments to back down on those policies. For example, when oil companies sued the province of Quebec for banning fracking in Canada. We think that those kind of examples show that the ISDS system has been misused and will be misused by corporations who already have a lot of power. Okay, we think that we also need to talk about how the EU, what are the concrete examples where the EU might do something. We think that one of those examples is the precautionary principle. The US has stated that it wants food safety policies to be based purely on scientifically proven studies, like scientific studies. Okay, we think that that necessarily hinders the EU from holding on to its precautionary principle. That when a food product has been suspected of having adverse effects on users, it can be pulled from the market and not allowed back to the market before it has been proven not to be harmful. We think that those are the kind of issues that we see the TTIP bringing and meaning that EU would lose out on these values. We think that it's necessary to have a functioning system, a functioning society where you can engage with these threats on a very active basis, where you can introduce new legislation when it is needed. For all these reasons, we are proud to oppose.